The cold was the first thing Maya registered, a deep, penetrating chill that had nothing to do with the winter air seeping through the cracks in her bedroom window. It was the cold of dread, a solid weight in her stomach that had kept her awake most of the night. On the floor beside her bed, propped against a cheap, glittery frame holding a picture of her son, Leo, was the formal eviction notice. December 24th. The date glared up at her, black and final. The words "greedy landlord" weren't printed on the official document, but in Maya Johnson's mind, they were etched across the page in letters of fire. She was a black single mom, and today, the day before Christmas, she and her 7-year-old son were being thrown out onto the street. A small sound from the doorway made her turn. Leo stood there, his favorite teddy bear, Mr. Snuggles, dangling from one hand. His big brown eyes, so wide and trusting, were clouded with a confusion that broke her heart. "Mommy, is it time to get up?" She forced a smile, the muscles in her face aching with the effort. "Almost, baby. Why don't you go get dressed? Wear your warmest sweater, okay?" He nodded, still sleepy, and padded back to his room. The moment he was gone, Maya's smile collapsed. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, fighting back the hot press of tears. She would not cry. She could not fall apart. Not yet, not in front of him. The knock came at 8:03 a.m. It wasn't a request for entry, it was a declaration. 3 sharp, authoritative raps that echoed through the small, shabby apartment like gunshots. Maya's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She pulled her thin robe tighter, a futile gesture against the chill, and opened the door. Mr. Grip stood there, a man whose face seemed permanently set in a smirk of petty triumph. Beside him was a large man in a city marshal's uniform, his expression carefully neutral, impersonally professional. "Time up, Maya," Grip said, his voice nasal and condescending. He didn't bother with pleasantries. His small, shrewd eyes scanned the room behind her, already seeing the space emptied of her and filled with the new, wealthier tenants he'd bragged about securing for a higher rent. "I need the keys." "Mr. Grips, please." Maya's voice was a frayed thread, worn thin from a sleepless night and 1,000 silent pleas. "It's Christmas Eve. I have almost all the back rent. I just need 1 more week. My paycheck from the diner clears on the 26th, and the temp agency said they might have a 3-day filing." Grips cut her off with a wave of his hand, a gesture so dismissive it was like a physical slap. "Should have thought of that before. A deal's a deal. You signed a lease. You're in breach. Now step aside, we have to change the locks." From the doorway of his bedroom, Leo watched, his small face pale. He clutched Mr. Snuggles so tightly his knuckles were white. The sight of her son's fear, the sheer, helpless terror in his eyes, ignited a spark of raw, maternal defiance in Maya's gut. For a wild second, she thought of slamming the door, of barricading them inside. But the spark was doused by the cold wave of reality. The large, impassive marshal. The law, cold and unyielding, standing right beside Grips. The absolute knowledge that she had nowhere to go and no one to call. Her entire life was condensed into this small, worn space. The threadbare couch she'd found on the curb, the small, lopsided Christmas tree with its 3 sad ornaments, the tiny kitchen where she'd learned the art of stretching a single packet of noodles and a can of tuna into 2 meals. The marshal moved past her, his presence filling the small living room. He began efficiently, methodically, carrying their few packed belongings out to the curb. 2 suitcases stuffed with clothes, a cardboard box containing their few kitchen items, a pot, 2 pans, 3 plates, 4 mismatched cups, a second box with Leo's toys and books. It was a pitifully small collection, a life reduced to a handful of boxes on a cold sidewalk. The air outside was biting, a sharp wind whipping down the city street, stealing the breath from Maya's lungs. She held Leo's hand, his small fingers icy in her own as they stood surrounded by the meager sum of their possessions. She could feel the weight of stares from behind the blinds of neighboring windows, a cocktail of pity, curiosity, and the smug relief of those who had been spared. The humiliation was a physical sensation, a hot flush that warred with the cold, leaving her shivering. Mr. Grips took a final, satisfied look at the scene, his eyes lingering on Maya's despair with a kind of grim pleasure. He jingled the new set of locks in his hand. "Merry Christmas," he said, the words dripping with such venomous irony that Maya felt nauseous. He slid into his warm sedan and drove off without a backward glance. Tears finally welled in her eyes, a hot, stinging pressure she could no longer contain. She blinked them back furiously, turning her face away from Leo. She could not let him see her break. She had to be the wall, the shield. She had to think. But her mind was a frantic, trapped bird, fluttering against the bars of a cage with no door. The women's shelter was full, she'd called yesterday. The little money she had tucked away in her wallet was for food, not a hotel room. The sheer, monstrous impossibility of their situation threatened to swallow her whole. It was then, through the blur of her unshed tears, that she saw the car. It was a luxury sedan, so sleek and black it seemed to absorb the weak morning light, a silent obsidian vessel parked across the street. She hadn't noticed it before. The windows were deeply tinted, but as she watched, frozen, the rear passenger window slid down without a sound. A man was inside. His gaze was fixed directly on her. This wasn't the casual, fleeting glance of a passerby. It was an intense, focused observation, a study. He was watching her with a stillness that was both unsettling and profound. He had seen it all, the eviction, the humiliation, the tears she was fighting so hard to hide. He had witnessed her rock bottom. For a long, suspended moment, their eyes locked across the frozen expanse of the street. Maya saw a man who looked to be in his late 40s, with a strong, clean-shaven jaw and dark hair shot with distinguished silver at the temples. But it was his eyes she remembered most, a piercing, intelligent gray, holding a depth she couldn't fathom. He didn't look away, didn't offer a sympathetic smile or a look of pity. His expression was unreadable, a calm mask that gave nothing away. Then, as silently as it had opened, the window glided back up, sealing him behind the dark glass. The car's engine purred to life, a quiet, powerful hum, and it pulled away from the curb, turning the corner and disappearing from view as if it had never been there. A strange sensation trickled through Maya's numbness. It wasn't hope. Hope was a luxury she'd long since abandoned. It was more like a shift in the atmosphere, the faintest whisper of a possibility that the world wasn't entirely indifferent. Who was he? Why had he stopped? The questions were a fleeting distraction from the immediate, pressing crisis. The wind bit through her thin coat and Leo sneezed, a small, pathetic sound. "I'm cold, Mommy." His voice, small and trembling, shattered her paralysis. "I know, baby, I know, come on." She managed to flag down a bus, heaving their suitcases and boxes into the storage compartment while Leo clung to her leg. The other passengers stared, their eyes flicking from their worn luggage to their tired faces. Maya kept her gaze fixed on the floor, the heat of shame returning to her cheeks. They got off downtown and found their way to the massive public library, the only free, warm haven she could think of. The hushed grandeur of the place felt alien and intimidating. They found a corner in the children's section, surrounded by the bright colors and cheerful murals that felt like a mockery of their despair. For hours they sat. Leo, exhausted and overwhelmed, eventually fell asleep on her lap, his head a heavy, trusting weight. Maya, her body aching with fatigue, navigated the library's public computer. Each click through the rental listings was a fresh exercise in futility. Everything was far beyond her meager budget. The words "eviction on record will be verified" were a death knell, echoing from every application. As the afternoon light began to wane, casting long, melancholy shadows across the reading tables, an older librarian with kind eyes and a name tag that read Agnes approached her. "Excuse me, Miss Johnson." Maya looked up, her heart giving a nervous jump. "Yes." "There's a gentleman at the front desk asking for you." The man from the car. The thought was instantaneous, a jolt of electricity. She carefully shifted Leo's sleeping form onto the chair, arranging her coat around him. "Can you watch him for just a moment?" she asked Agnes, her voice tight with anxiety. "Of course, dear." Maya walked to the main desk, her legs unsteady. But the man waiting for her wasn't the intense stranger from the sedan. This man was younger, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, and he held a large, flat envelope. "Maya Johnson?" he asked, his tone polite but impersonal. "That's me." He handed her the envelope. "This is for you. Have a good day." And with a curt nod he turned and walked away, his polished shoes making no sound on the marble floor. Bewildered, Maya looked down at the envelope. It was made of a heavy, expensive-feeling paper. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and slid out the contents. It wasn't a letter. It was a single, glossy black credit card. There was no name embossed on it, just a series of raised numbers. Taped to the front was a small, plain white card. On it, in a bold, decisive script, was a handwritten note. "For a hotel, for food, for whatever you and your son need. There is no limit. Do not be proud. Be a mother. An observer." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She looked around the vast library foyer, half expecting to see the man from the car leaning against a bookshelf, watching her reaction. But there was no one. The card felt cold and alien in her hand. This was insane. A cruel joke. A mistake of monumental proportions. But the weight of the card, the crispness of the paper, the authority in the handwriting, it all felt terrifyingly real. Driven by a desperate, primal need to get Leo out of the public eye and into a real bed, she gathered her son and their bags and walked out of the library. The wind had grown sharper, and the sky was threatening snow. She saw a modest, clean-looking hotel a few blocks away, the kind she would never have even considered walking into before. At the front desk, her hands shook as she placed the black card on the counter. The young clerk picked it up, his eyebrows rising almost imperceptibly as he swiped it. He glanced at his screen, then back at her, his demeanor shifting from bored indifference to a respectful attentiveness. "Your room is paid for, ma'am, for as long as you need it." He handed her 2 key cards. "Suite 412. I hope you and your son have a comfortable stay." Suite, the word echoed in her mind as the elevator doors closed. They weren't just getting a room, they were getting a suite. The door to 412 opened into a small living area with a sofa, a table, and a kitchenette, with a separate bedroom beyond. It was clean, warm, and safe. To Maya, it felt like a palace. Leo, wide awake now, ran around exploring, his earlier fear forgotten in the wonder of this new adventure. "We get to live here, Mommy." "For a little while, baby," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She ordered room service, something she had never done in her life. When the cart arrived, laden with a cheeseburger, fries, and a chocolate milkshake for Leo, and a garden salad and soup for her, she felt a surreal disconnect. Hours ago, they had been on the street. Now they were dining in a warm hotel room, the city lights twinkling outside their window. That night, Leo fell asleep almost instantly, his belly full, nestled deep in the comfortable bed. Maya, however, lay awake, staring at the black card she had placed on the nightstand. It glinted in the dim light, a token from a ghost, a key to a temporary paradise that felt more like a gilded cage. Who was this observer? What did he want? The anonymity of it was terrifying. Yet he had known her name. He had known where to find her. He was watching, a silent, unseen presence in their lives. The next morning, Christmas Day, another delivery arrived. The front desk called, and a bellhop brought up a large, heavy box from a department store whose name she only knew from magazine ads. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were clothes. A beautiful, heavy, wool-blend winter coat for her in a deep burgundy that was her color. For Leo, a puffy, down-filled jacket, new jeans, sturdy boots, and warm sweaters. All of it was in their exact sizes. There was also a brand-new, top-of-the-line tablet for Leo, already set up and loaded with age-appropriate games and movies. There was no note this time. The message was clearer than words. "I am watching, I know you, I am providing." For the next week they lived in the hotel. Maya used the black card with a sense of profound unease, purchasing only essentials, groceries from a nearby market, toiletries, a few new books for Leo. Every time she swiped the card, she waited for the decline, for the alarm, for the hand on her shoulder. But it never came. The transactions were seamless, silent. The invisible safety net held. She spent her days searching in earnest for a new apartment and a better, more stable job. The reprieve from immediate crisis gave her a clarity she hadn't possessed before. She could think, she could plan without the constant, gnawing panic of homelessness. A week after the eviction, a thick, formal envelope was slipped under their hotel room door. This one contained a single cream-colored business card. The name was embossed in elegant, raised lettering, Julian Thorne. Below it was the title, CEO, Thorne Capital, and an address in the city's most prestigious financial district. Paperclipped to the card was another small note, in the same handwriting. My office, tomorrow 10 a.m. We have matters to discuss. JT. The observer had a name, Julian Thorne. A quick search on the hotel's computer sent a fresh wave of shock through her. Thorne Capital was a behemoth, a private equity firm known for aggressive, brilliant investments. Julian Thorne was a billionaire, a figure who appeared occasionally in the business sections, a man described as reclusive, ruthless, and a genius. And he had been watching her from a car across the street. The following day, Maya dressed in the new clothes he had sent her, the burgundy coat feeling like a suit of armor. She took the subway to the financial district, the journey feeling like a passage into another world. The building that housed Thorne Capital was a towering glass monolith that speared the gray winter sky. The lobby was a vast cavern of polished marble and steel, filled with the purposeful hum of people who belonged. The receptionist, expecting her, escorted her to a private elevator that required a keycard. It opened directly into a breathtaking corner office. The view was staggering, a panoramic sweep of the city skyline, the river a silver ribbon in the distance. And standing before the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her, was the man from the car, Julian Thorne. He turned slowly as she entered. In person, he was even more imposing. He carried an aura of immense, controlled power, a stillness that seemed to draw all the energy from the room. He was taller than she'd realized, his shoulders broad beneath his perfectly fitted suit. His gray eyes, now that she could see them clearly, were sharp, intelligent, and utterly discerning. "Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice a low, calm baritone that held no warmth but no malice either. It was simply a statement of fact. "Please sit down." He gestured to a pair of minimalist leather chairs facing a massive, empty desk. Maya remained standing, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Why are you doing this?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "I told you, I was an observer." He moved to stand behind the desk, not sitting, resting his fingertips on its polished surface. "I saw a woman being treated with a contempt I find personally offensive. I saw a mother trying to shield her son from a cruelty he could not possibly understand. I saw strength in the face of utter powerlessness. I decided to intervene." He explained, in concise, unemotional terms, what he did. He was a venture capitalist, a speculator in human and corporate potential. He'd been in her neighborhood for an early meeting with a tech startup and had witnessed the entire eviction from his car. "I am not a philanthropist, Maya. May I call you Maya?" he continued, not waiting for her consent. "I am an investor, and I see a unique potential. Your background check." He tapped a thin folder on his desk. "The sum of her life condensed into a few sheets of paper shows a woman who has been navigating systemic obstacles her entire life. You work 2 jobs, you've raised a remarkably resilient and intelligent son against steep odds, you have no criminal record, no substance abuse issues. You have been failed by the system, yet you have not failed. That demonstrates resilience, resourcefulness, tenacity. These are valuable assets." He then laid out his proposition. It was not charity, he reiterated. He would clear her outstanding debt, secure her a lease on a safe, furnished 2-bedroom apartment in an excellent school district, and offer her a job, a salaried position with full benefits in his company's corporate social responsibility division. He claimed her lived experience gave her a perspective his company lacked, a genuine understanding of the communities they ostensibly sought to help. In return, he said, his intense gaze locking with hers, pinning her to the spot, "You let me handle Mr. Grips." Maya's mind reeled. It was everything. It was a future security, a chance for Leo. It was a miracle wrapped in a business proposal. But the cold, calculating way he presented it, the utter lack of sentiment, made her deeply wary. "What does handling Mr. Grips mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. A cold, sharp smile, the first genuine expression she had seen on his face, transformed his features. It was a smile devoid of warmth, a predator's smile. "Let's just say I believe in karmic balance, and I am exceptionally good at being karma's instrument. He will not bother you again. That I guarantee." Terrified for her son's future, isolated, and seeing no other path that didn't lead back to the street or a shelter, Maya agreed. Her signature on the employment contract felt like signing a deal with a devil she didn't understand, but a devil who offered heaven. The transition was as dizzying as it was efficient. Within 48 hours, they were moving into a bright, modern apartment in a building with a doorman and a playground. It was furnished with simple, elegant pieces, nothing extravagant, but everything was new, clean, and solid. Leo was enrolled in the local elementary school, a place with resources and a reputation she had only dreamed of. Maya started her new job, which involved reviewing grant applications and community project proposals. It was challenging, engaging work that utilized her intelligence and her empathy, and her colleagues treated her with respect. Julian Thorne was true to his word. He was a distant presence. He did not call her, did not visit. She saw him only once from a distance, walking through the corporate office with a retinue of assistants. He nodded once, a brief, impersonal acknowledgement, and moved on. He was simply the architect of her new reality, a ghost in the machine. Weeks bled into a month. A fragile sense of normalcy, of safety, began to settle over Maya and Leo. The memory of the eviction began to feel like a bad dream. Then, one evening, as Maya was preparing dinner in their new kitchen, a news segment on the local television caught her eye. The graphic on the screen showed a familiar face, contorted in anger and shock. The headline scrolling below made her drop the wooden spoon she was holding. It clattered loudly on the tile floor. "Local landlord faces total financial ruin after shocking, hostile real estate takeover." On the screen was a live shot of a frantic, disheveled Mr. Grips, shouting at reporters outside a building she recognized as one of his properties. The reporter's voice was crisp and excited. "In a stunning turn of events, landlord Alvin Grips has lost his entire property portfolio, estimated at over 24 buildings, in what insiders are calling a brilliantly executed financial ambush. A silent partner in many of his holdings, a real estate investment trust known as the Johnson-Thorne Foundation, invoked a series of obscure clauses and leveraged his significant debt to force a fire sale buyout for pennies on the dollar. Grips is reportedly left with nothing. The foundation, a new non-profit entity, has announced plans to renovate the properties and offer them as affordable, dignified housing. Johnson-Thorne, the name echoed in the silent room, her name paired with his. Her phone vibrated on the counter, an unknown number, but she knew. She answered it, her hand trembling. "You saw the news." Julian Thorne's voice was calm, as if discussing the weather. "You used my name," she breathed, her mind struggling to process the scale of what he had done. "It was your justice, Maya," he said, his tone matter-of-fact, devoid of gloating. "I was merely the instrument. The foundation is real. It is well-funded and will now provide safe housing for dozens of families in situations mirroring your own." Grips evicted one single mother. He lost his entire empire because of it. The math, I believe, is elegantly proportional. Maya sank into a kitchen chair, the world tilting on its axis. She felt a whirlwind of emotions, A fierce, primal vindication, a shock at the sheer, brutal efficiency of his revenge, and a cold thread of fear weaving through it all. This was the power he wielded. This was what handling Mr. Grips meant. He hadn't just gotten back at him, he had annihilated him and in the process had created something good from the wreckage, all while stamping her name on it. She looked through the kitchen doorway into the living room, where Leo was sitting on the rug, completely absorbed in building a complex structure with his new Lego set. He was safe. He was happy. He was thriving. The fear in his eyes from that cold morning was gone, replaced by a bright, focused curiosity. The cold of that Christmas Eve morning was now a memory, a ghost. In its place was the warm, steady glow of a future, finally, full of promise. Julian Thorne was not a saint. He was a force of nature, a man who balanced ledgers of power and consequence with a chilling precision. But he had, for reasons of his own, chosen to balance the ledger for her. And as she watched her son play, surrounded by the security she had fought for so long to achieve, Maya knew that in the complicated, terrifying arithmetic of their new lives, the sum was, for the first time, in their favor. The silence in the warm, well-lit apartment was profound after Maya ended the call. The only sound was the soft click-clack of Leo's Legos from the living room. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands still trembling, the image of a ruined Mr. Grips seared onto the back of her eyelids. Johnson-Thorne Foundation. Her name was now irrevocably tied to Julian Thorne, a permanent mark on the instrument of a man's destruction. It felt less like a gift and more like a brand. The vindication was a hot, bright flare in her chest, impossible to deny. The man who had smirked as he threw a single mother and her child onto a cold sidewalk had received a punishment so perfectly scaled to his crime it felt biblical. But the cold, methodical way it had been carried out, the elegantly proportional math, as Julian had called it, left a metallic taste of fear in her mouth. This was the true nature of the man who now held the strings of her life. He wasn't just a benefactor. He was a strategist who played with human lives as if they were chess pieces, and he had just demonstrated his power with devastating clarity. "Mommy, look, it's a spaceship." Leo's voice, bright and unburdened, cut through her turmoil. She forced herself to stand, to walk into the living room, to kneel beside him. "It's amazing, baby, so tall. He's gonna fly to a new planet where everyone has a house," Leo declared, engrossed in his narrative. The innocent words struck her with the force of a physical blow, where everyone has a house. The foundation that now bore her name was supposed to do just that. Julian had created a monster of a paradox. He had orchestrated an act of ruthless corporate vengeance that would, in turn, fund acts of profound social good. Where did that leave her? Complicit? Grateful? Terrified? "He's a good guy, right, Mommy?" Leo asked, pointing at his Lego astronaut. Maya looked at her son's earnest face. "He is if he uses his spaceship to help people," she said, her voice softer than she intended. The next few days at Thorne Capital were surreal. The story of the Johnson-Thorne Foundation was all over the business news, and her colleagues, who had always been politely respectful, now regarded her with a new, wary curiosity. She was no longer just the new hire from the Community Outreach Department. She was the Johnson in the foundation that had just executed one of the most talked-about financial takedowns in recent local history. Whispers followed her to the water cooler. She saw the questions in their eyes. Who is she really? What's her connection to Thorne? She buried herself in her work, reviewing applications for after-school programs and small business grants. It was meaningful work, and she was good at it. Her lived experience allowed her to see the truth behind the polished grant proposals, to identify the community projects that had real heart versus those that were just for show. For a few hours each day, she could almost forget the gnawing anxiety about her benefactor. A week after the news broke, an inter-office envelope appeared on her desk. No return address, just her name typed on a label. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout of a real estate listing. It was for a small, charming house with a fenced-in yard in a neighborhood with towering oak trees and excellent schools. The address was circled in red pen. Scribbled in the margin in that now familiar bold script were two words: a possibility. Her breath hitched. A house. A real home with a yard for Leo. It was the unspoken dream, the thing that felt 1,000 miles away even in their nice apartment. This was the next move in Julian Thorne's game. He was incrementally building her a perfect life, piece by piece, and with each piece, the chain linking her to him grew stronger. What would be the price for this possibility? The thought was a constant, low hum of dread beneath the surface of her new stability. That evening, as she was reading to Leo before bed, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number, but she knew. Unknown, the foundation requires a board of directors. Your presence is required at the inaugural meeting. Tomorrow, 8 p.m., the penthouse. JT. The penthouse, his home. A fresh wave of anxiety washed over her. This was a new level of intimacy, a step beyond the impersonal office or the anonymous hotel deliveries. She thought of making an excuse, of claiming Leo was sick. But the memory of that black card, the warm hotel room, the new coat on her back, the security she saw in her son's eyes every day, it all formed a cage of gratitude she couldn't escape. The following night, after arranging for a babysitter from a service vetted by Julian's own staff, Maya stood outside the private elevator that led to the penthouse of the Thorne Capitol building. She wore the burgundy coat like a shield. The elevator doors opened directly into a vast, minimalist space. The entire far wall was glass, offering a breathtaking, almost violent, panorama of the city lights. The interior was all cool tones of steel, concrete, and dark wood. It was stunning, but it felt more like a museum than a home, devoid of personal touches, of warmth. Julian stood near the window, holding a crystal tumbler. He was dressed down in dark trousers and a simple black sweater, which made him seem both more approachable and more intimidating. "Ms. Johnson," he greeted, turning, "thank you for coming." "There are other board members," Maya asked, looking around the empty room. "The others are connected remotely," he said, gesturing to a large monitor on the wall that showed 3 blank screens. "They are silent partners, investors. Your voice is the one that matters for the public face of the foundation." He led her to a long table where a stack of documents awaited. For the next hour, he walked her through the foundation structure, its funding, its goals. He was all business, his mind a razor-sharp instrument that dissected complex legal and financial jargon with ease. Maya did her best to keep up, asking questions, forcing herself to focus. As the meeting wound down, the screens went dark, leaving them alone in the vast, silent penthouse. Julian poured himself another drink and offered her one. She declined. "He's in a rehab facility in Nevada," Julian said abruptly, his back to her as he looked out at the city. "Grips. His wife left him, took what little liquid assets he had left." Maya stiffened. "Why are you telling me this?" He turned, his gray eyes capturing hers in the reflection of the window before he fully faced her. "Because you deserve to know the final calculation. The equation is complete. I assumed you would want closure." "Closure?" she repeated, a sudden, unexpected anger bubbling up inside her. "You didn't give me closure. You gave me a front row seat to a demolition. You used my name. You made me a part of it." "Is that what bothers you?" he asked, his head tilting slightly. "The participation, or the result? Dozens of families will have safe, affordable homes because of what we did. Your son sleeps in a safe home because of what I did. The method may be uncomfortable, but the outcome is just. You of all people should understand that the world rarely offers clean, kind justice." "We," she shot back, her voice rising. "There is no we. You moved me around like one of your chess pieces. You never asked me if I wanted this kind of vengeance." "What would you have chosen, Maya?" he asked, his voice dropping, becoming dangerously soft. "A strongly worded letter, a protest. Would that have housed those families? Would that have given you the power to never be a victim again?" He took a step toward her, and she stood her ground, the anger giving her a courage she didn't know she possessed. "You confuse control for power," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "You bought my life and now you're trying to buy my approval for how you're managing it. This," she gestured around the sterile, magnificent penthouse, "this isn't a home, it's a display case, and you're trying to put me in one too." For a long moment he just looked at her, and she saw something flicker in those impassive gray eyes, not anger, but a spark of genuine surprise, perhaps even respect. He was a man who was never challenged, never spoken to in this way. "You are not a piece on my board, Maya," he said, his voice low. "You are a player. You just haven't decided to pick up your pieces yet." He picked up the house listing from the table where he'd placed it earlier. "This isn't a bribe, it's a tool. The foundation can purchase it. You would be its property manager, a live-in supervisor for a cluster of our homes. A real job with real responsibilities and a real salary that would allow you to pay your own way. Your independence, forged within the structure I provide. That is the possibility." He was offering her a path, a way to be under his umbrella without being entirely in his shadow. It was a masterful move, giving her exactly what she craved, agency, while keeping her within his orbit. Maya looked from his unreadable face to the photograph of the house with its green lawn and picket fence. It was a choice, not between good and evil, but between a difficult, uncertain freedom and a gilded, controlled security. Leo's face flashed in her mind, the spaceship flying to a planet where everyone had a house. She reached out and took the paper from his hand. Her fingers did not tremble. "I'll consider it," she said, her voice firm. "On my terms, and I'll have my lawyer look over the contract." A slow, genuine smile, the first she had ever seen that reached his eyes, spread across Julian Thorne's face. It transformed him, making him look younger, almost human. "Finally," he said, the single word laden with a meaning she couldn't quite decipher, "I'll have the documents sent to you in the morning." As she rode the elevator down, the panoramic view of the city shrinking away, Maya felt a shift within herself. The fear was still there, the unease about the man upstairs and his terrifying power, but it was now joined by something else, a burgeoning sense of her own strength. He had seen her as an investment, an asset, but perhaps an asset could become a partner. Perhaps a player could learn to win the game. She stepped out into the cool night air, the picture of the house clutched tightly in her hand. The game was far from over, but for the first time she felt she was finally learning the rules. The documents arrived by courier the next morning, a thick, weighty stack of paper that felt like a physical manifestation of the choice before her. True to her word, Maya took them to a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Brenda Walsh, who specialized in non-profit and contract law. Brenda's eyes widened slightly as she flipped through the pages. "The terms are surprisingly favorable, Maya," Brenda said, adjusting her glasses. "The salary is more than fair, the responsibilities are clearly outlined, and the clause for the property's eventual transfer to your name after a 5-year tenure is almost unheard of. Thorne's lawyers have left very little to negotiate. It's as if they anticipated your every concern." Of course they did, Maya thought. Julian Thorne didn't leave things to chance. He was a master strategist, and this contract was his new chessboard. He wasn't just giving her a house. He was giving her a purpose, a stake in the empire he was building, ensuring her loyalty wasn't born of gratitude but of shared interest. She signed the papers. The move to the house on Elm Street was a quiet affair. It wasn't the sterile luxury of the penthouse, nor the temporary haven of the hotel. It was a home, a 2-story craftsman with a wide porch, a sturdy oak tree in the front yard, and that promised white picket fence. The foundation owned it, along with the 4 identical houses on either side, which were in the final stages of renovation. Maya's role was to be the community liaison, the on-site manager, the friendly face of the Johnson-Thorne Foundation. Leo was ecstatic. He had a yard. He had his own room, painted a soft blue he had chosen himself. He hung his Lego spaceship from the ceiling with careful precision. Watching him run across the grass, whooping with joy, Maya felt a profound, fierce certainty that she had made the right choice. Her first official duty was to welcome the new tenants. The Miller family, a couple with 3 young children fleeing a slumlord not unlike Grips. The Garcias, an elderly couple on a fixed income who had been priced out of their neighborhood of 50 years. Seeing the hope and trepidation in their eyes was like looking into a mirror from months past. But this time, she was the one holding the keys, the one offering the safe harbor. Julian was a ghost in the machine of her new life. He never visited Elm Street. His communication was relegated to brief, efficient emails about foundation business or the occasional text message about a relevant zoning law or a potential community partner. He was respecting the boundaries she had implicitly set, treating her as a colleague, a subordinate but one whose opinion he clearly valued. He would send her proposals for her review, and sometimes he would even accept her revisions without comment. One evening, a month after they had moved in, a different kind of email arrived. The subject line was simple: invitation. The annual Thorne Capital Charity Gala. Your presence and that of the foundation is required. It is an opportunity to network and secure further funding. A car will be sent at 7 p.m. JT. It wasn't a request. It was a summons back into his world. The night of the gala, Maya stood in front of her bedroom mirror, wearing a simple but elegant black gown she had bought with her own salary. It felt different from the clothes he had bought her. This was hers. The doorbell rang precisely at 7. Not a luxury sedan this time, but a sleek, black town car. The gala was held in the ballroom of a museum, a whirlwind of crystal chandeliers, champagne flutes, and the low, powerful hum of immense wealth. Maya felt a familiar pang of being an imposter, a girl from the diner and the temp agency walking among titans. But then she saw Julian. He was holding court at the center of the room, surrounded by a circle of older, influential-looking men. He saw her over their shoulders, and for a fraction of a second, the polished, impassive mask slipped. His gaze swept over her, not with ownership, but with something akin to appreciation. He excused himself from his group and walked toward her. "Miss Johnson," he said, his voice a low murmur that cut through the din, "you look appropriate." It was the closest he would ever come to a compliment. "Mr. Thorne," she nodded. "Come," he said, offering his arm. "There are people you need to meet." For the next hour he guided her through the room, introducing her not as his employee, but as Maya Johnson, the driving force behind our Johnson-Thorne Foundation. He let her speak, watching silently as she passionately described the families on Elm Street, the after-school program they were launching, the tangible difference they were making. She watched as hard-faced investors softened, as checkbooks emerged. She was winning, and he was letting her. During a lull, they found themselves on a quiet balcony overlooking the city. The sounds of the gala were muted behind them. "You were impressive in there," he said, leaning against the railing. "I believe in the work," she replied, sipping her water. "I know it's why it's working." He looked out at the skyline, the kingdom he had built. "The foundation's success is attracting attention, the right kind and the wrong kind." "What does that mean?" "It means that our method with Grips has made some people nervous. Other landlords, certain city council members who benefited from his contributions. They see the foundation as a threat." He turned to her, his face half in shadow. "Your success makes you a target, Maya. I need you to be prepared for that." A cold knot tightened in her stomach. The safety of Elm Street suddenly felt fragile. What kind of target? Before he could answer, a smooth, unctuous voice interrupted them. "Julian, hiding out with the most captivating woman here I see." A man in his 50s, with a too-perfect tan and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, joined them. Councilman Richard Vance. "Richard," Julian's tone was cool, a clear warning. "And you must be the famous Maya Johnson," Vance said, taking her hand in both of his. His grip was damp. "I've heard so much about your little project. Such a noble endeavor, though some are wondering if your foundation is perhaps overreaching, trying to fix a system that isn't broken. Maya gently extracted her hand. The system is broken for the families I work with, councilman. We're just trying to provide a patch while we work on a larger fix. Vance's smile tightened. A larger fix, how ambitious, one might almost say disruptive. His eyes flicked to Julian. Be careful, my dear. The city is a complex machine. Sometimes well-intentioned patches can cause the whole engine to seize up. He gave a curt nod and melted back into the crowd. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Julian was silent and pensive on the car ride back to Elm Street. When the car pulled up to her curb, he finally spoke. Vance is a problem. He was Grips's man on the council. He's afraid we're coming for him next. Are we? Maya asked, her hand on the door handle. Julian looked at her, and in the dim light of the car, his gray eyes were like chips of flint. That, he said, is no longer just my decision to make, is it? He didn't wait for an answer. The car door closed and it pulled away, leaving her standing on the sidewalk in front of her warm, safe house. But the safety was an illusion. The chessboard had just gotten bigger and the stakes had been raised. Councilman Vance wasn't just a greedy landlord. He was a politician, a different kind of predator with a different set of claws. She walked inside, the silken gown feeling like a suit of armor she couldn't take off. Leo was fast asleep, his spaceship casting a faint, mobile-shaped shadow on the wall. She had fought for this peace, this stability. She had fought a landlord and won, with Julian as her weapon. Now a new enemy was emerging from the shadows, and this time the fight would be different. This time she wasn't a pawn, she was a player, and as she looked at her son, safe and dreaming, she knew that for his future, for the families on Elm Street, and for the woman she was becoming, she would have to learn to be a dangerous one. The game was far from over. A new, more complex level had just begun. The silence in the house after the town car pulled away was profound. Maya stood in her living room, the elegant gown suddenly feeling like a costume from a play she hadn't auditioned for. Councilman Vance's damp handshake seemed to linger on her skin, and his veiled threat echoed in the quiet. Sometimes, well-intentioned patches can cause the whole engine to seize up. She was no longer just fixing a problem, she was perceived as one. The next morning, the idyllic peace of Elm Street felt different. The sun dappling through the oak tree, the sound of Leo laughing in the backyard. It was all still there, but now underpinned by a low, constant hum of anxiety. Julian's warning had been clear. Your success makes you a target. The first shot across the bow came not with a bang, but with a bureaucratic whisper. A week after the gala, a city inspector showed up at the Garcia's door, citing an anonymous complaint about improper drainage in the newly renovated basement. The following day, a zoning official arrived, questioning the legality of having multiple family units on a single lot, despite all the permits being in perfect order. Maya spent her days on the phone, navigating a labyrinth of city departments, her frustration mounting. Each dead end and vague response felt intentional, a coordinated effort to strangle their project with red tape. She emailed Julian a concise summary. His reply was instantaneous and characteristically blunt. Vance, he's testing our defenses. How we respond sets the precedent. What do you want to do? He added, a simple question that carried the weight of a loaded gun. Maya stared at the screen. This was the moment. The choice between the woman she was and the player she needed to become. She couldn't fight this with a heartfelt speech at a gala. She needed leverage. She thought of the diner where she used to work, the gossip that flowed as freely as the coffee. Information was currency everywhere, just of different denominations. She picked up the phone and called Brenda, her lawyer. Brenda, it's Maya. I need you to look into something for me. Councilman Richard Vance. I want to know who his biggest donors are, specifically any with ties to real estate. A few days later, Brenda called back, her voice tinged with excitement. You were right. Vance's largest campaign contributor is a property management corporation called Metro Holdings. They own a massive portfolio of low-income housing. Guess who was one of their most aggressive regional managers before he went out on his own? Maya's breath caught. Alvin Grips. Bingo, it's all connected, Maya. Vance protects Metro's interests, they fund his campaigns, and they used Grips as their attack dog. You and Julian didn't just take down a lone wolf. You kicked a hornet's nest that funds a city councilman. The information was a cold, hard stone in Maya's hand. It was power. The question was how to use it. She didn't go to Julian. Not yet. Instead, she asked Brenda to dig deeper, to find a specific, tangible pressure point. A property violation Metro Holdings had swept under the rug, a tenant lawsuit they'd quietly settled. While Brenda worked, Maya focused on strengthening her own position. She organized a neighborhood potluck, bringing together the families on Elm Street. She didn't mention Vance or the inspections. She talked about community watches, shared childcare, a tool library. She was building a network not just of houses but of people. A community was harder to break than a building. A few weeks later, Brenda delivered. She had found it, a pending class-action lawsuit against Metro Holdings for systemic neglect of lead paint in several of their older properties, a case they were desperately trying to bury. Maya finally scheduled a meeting with Julian. She didn't go to his penthouse. She asked him to come to her office on Elm Street. He arrived, an anomaly in his bespoke suit amidst the IKEA furniture and children's artwork. He looked intrigued. "You have a strategy," he stated, taking a seat. "I do." She slid Brenda's report on the class-action lawsuit across the desk. "Vance's largest donor is vulnerable. This lawsuit, if it gains public traction, would be a scandal that could sink him along with them." Julian scanned the document, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. It was the same predator's smile she'd seen before, but this time it felt different. This time, she was the one who had brought him the prey. "This is excellent," he said. "I can have my legal team amplify this, leak it to the press. It will be a definitive strike." "No," Maya said, her voice firm. Julian's smile faded, replaced by a look of genuine curiosity. "No. A public war creates collateral damage. The tenants in those Metro Holding properties are the ones who suffer most from scandals and instability. We don't want to destroy Vance. We want to neutralize him." "And how do you propose we do that?" "We use this," she tapped the report, "not as a bomb but as a key. We arrange a private meeting with the councilman. We show him we have the power to publicly tie him to a slumlord empire poisoning children. And then we don't ask for his resignation. We ask for his cooperation." Julian was silent for a long moment, studying her. He saw not a grateful beneficiary, not a righteous activist, but a strategist. "You want to turn him." "I want the zoning inspections to stop. I want his assurance that the Johnson-Thorne Foundation will face no further political obstruction. I want him to understand that his political survival is now tied to our success, not our failure." The air in the small office crackled. Julian leaned back, a glint of something akin to pride in his steely eyes. "You're not just patching the system, are you, Maya? You're learning to rewire it." "You told me to pick up my pieces," she replied, holding his gaze. "I'm just deciding how to play them." The meeting with Councilman Vance was held in a neutral, private conference room. He arrived, smug and condescending. Julian let Maya lead. She didn't raise her voice. She simply laid out the facts, connecting him to Metro Holdings, to the buried lawsuit, to the trail of political donations. She watched the color drain from his artificially tanned face. "This is blackmail," he hissed. "It's a mutual understanding, Richard," Julian said, speaking for the first time, his voice dangerously soft. "Maya is offering you a path forward, a path that doesn't end with you on the front page of the newspaper, next to a story about lead-poisoned children." Vance looked from Julian's implacable face to Maya's resolute one. He saw the futility of his position. The predator was now cornered. "What do you want?" he whispered, defeated. Maya slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a list of the bureaucratic obstacles his office had created, and a simple, one-sentence promise of non-interference, ready for his signature. He signed it. Walking out of the conference room, Maya felt a quiet, solid sense of power. It wasn't the explosive, destructive power Julian wielded. It was a surgical, precise power. The power of knowing exactly where to press. In the elevator, Julian looked at her. "You were right. It was more elegant. My way would have been messier." "It's not about elegance," Maya said, watching the floor numbers descend. "It's about building something that lasts. You can't do that with just a hammer." He nodded, a gesture of deep respect. The student was not only learning, she was beginning to surpass the master in finesse. That evening, Maya sat on her porch, listening to the sounds of her neighborhood, the miller's kids playing catch, Mr. Garcia watering his roses. It was safe, for now, but she knew this wasn't the end. There would always be another Vance, another threat. But she was no longer afraid of the game. She was no longer just a player. She was defining the rules. And as she looked out at the community she was building, she knew that her greatest strength wasn't the billionaire beside her or the damning documents in her filing cabinet. It was the trust of the people on Elm Street. That was a power even Julian Thorne couldn't buy, and one that no councilman could easily break. The board was set, and she held the most powerful piece of all, a home worth fighting for. The victory over Vance was a quiet one, with no headlines or public scandals. The zoning inspection ceased, the anonymous complaints dried up, and a strained, professional cordiality fell between the foundation and the councilman's office. But the silence felt like the calm at the eye of a hurricane. Maya knew the peace was purchased, not won, and purchased things have a way of coming with hidden costs. The cost manifested subtly at first. A prestigious city planning committee, one that would shape urban development for the next decade, was formed. Julian expected a seat at the table. It was a logical extension of the foundation's work. The invitation never came. Instead, the seat went to a rival nonprofit, one with deep political ties and a less disruptive approach to urban renewal. Julian took the snub with icy silence, but Maya saw the flicker in his eyes. It was the look of a chess master who had just realized his opponent had moved a pawn in a way that challenged the fundamental rules of the game. Vance was keeping his promise of non-interference, but he was also ensuring they remained contained, sidelined from the real centers of power. "This is a different kind of war," Julian said, standing once more before the panoramic window of his penthouse. Maya had been summoned, the informal meetings on Elm Street seemingly a thing of the past. The balance had shifted again. "He's not attacking us. He's walling us off." "Then we need a key," Maya replied, her voice calm. She had been expecting this. "We can't just keep playing defense, reacting to his moves. We need to make a move he can't predict." Julian turned, his interest piqued. "And what move would that be?" "We stop asking for a seat at their table," she said, a bold idea that had been forming for weeks taking full shape. "We build our own." She laid it out. The Johnson-Thorne Foundation would launch its own initiative, independent of city approval or political patronage. They would use their capital to acquire a derelict, city-owned block in a neglected neighborhood, a place Vance and his allies had written off. They wouldn't just build apartments. They would build a self-sustaining micro-community, a clinic with a sliding-scale fee, a cooperative grocery store to combat the food desert, a vocational training center. It would be a living, breathing proof of concept that their model worked, a showcase so brilliant and effective it would be impossible for the city to ignore. "It's a massive risk," Julian stated, his mind already calculating the financial exposure. "The capital outlay is enormous. The potential for failure is significant." The potential to change the entire conversation is greater, Maya countered. This isn't about winning a zoning battle, Julian. This is about demonstrating a new reality. We make our own rules on that block. We call it the Elm Street prototype. If it works here, it can work anywhere. It makes their committees irrelevant. He studied her, and she saw the moment the calculator in his mind was overruled by the strategist. A slow, genuine smile, one of pure, unadulterated ambition, spread across his face. It was the most human she had ever seen him. "Do it," he said. The following months were a whirlwind of exhausting, exhilarating work. Maya became the public face of the prototype, her story, from evicted waitress to community architect, becoming a powerful part of the narrative. She rallied community leaders, held town halls in church basements, and listened more than she spoke. Julian worked the back channels, leveraging his financial might to acquire the land and fast-track the necessary, albeit limited, permits they needed. They were a perfect, if unlikely, partnership. Her ground-up credibility and his top-down power created an unstoppable momentum. The official groundbreaking ceremony was set for a bright Saturday in October. The neglected block had been cleared, a blank canvas of dirt and possibility. A stage was erected, and a crowd gathered, residents, community activists, and, to Maya's surprise, a smattering of local press. Vance's attempts to wall them off had failed. Their story was too compelling. Maya stood at the podium, Leo beaming in the front row next to a stoic but visibly satisfied Julian Thorne. She looked out at the crowd, at the hope on their faces. "This isn't just about buildings," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the autumn air. "It's about belief. It's the belief that a system can be changed not from the top down but from the ground up. It's the belief that a community, when given the right tools, can build its own future." She was about to introduce Julian when a commotion at the back of the crowd caught her eye. A group of a dozen people had arrived, holding signs. Not protest signs, but resumes. They were neatly dressed, their faces a mixture of hope and desperation. A man at the front, who introduced himself as David, spoke into the small PA system a reporter offered. "Ms. Johnson, we heard you were building. We're from the Metro Holdings corporate office. The company, it's downsizing. Our entire department was let go. We were told you're creating the future here. We were wondering if you had a place for us." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. The irony was breathtaking. Vance's primary donor, the very entity they were fighting, was now collapsing, and its cast-off workers were seeking refuge at Maya's door. All eyes turned to her. This was a test she hadn't prepared for. These were not the victims of the system. They were its former middle managers. Did her community have room for them? She looked at Julian. His expression was unreadable, but he gave a single, slight nod. The decision was hers. Maya stepped back to the microphone, her heart pounding. "The Elm Street prototype is about building a new system," she said, her voice firm. "And a new system needs all kinds of builders. David, after this ceremony, you and your colleagues can come see me. We'll find a place for you to start." A roar of applause erupted, louder than before. It was a moment of profound, messy human victory. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Julian approached her. "That was a dangerous gamble. Integrating them won't be easy." "Nothing worth doing is," Maya replied, watching as David and his group tentatively mingled with the community residents. "You taught me that the world is a series of calculations, but some calculations have to include grace." Julian was quiet for a moment, observing the chaotic, hopeful scene. "He's finished, you know, Vance. Without Metro's money and with this," he gestured at the bustling, groundbreaking site, "his influence is gone. You didn't just beat him, you made him obsolete." Maya nodded. She felt no triumph, only a heavy, sobering sense of responsibility. The game wasn't about defeating a single opponent anymore. It was about what you built after you won. She looked at the empty lot, no longer seeing dirt but seeing the clinic. The school, the homes. She saw the former Metro Holdings managers learning new skills alongside the lifelong residents. She saw a future being built, not by a billionaire or a political machine, but by a community she had helped to assemble. The pawn had not just become a player. She had become the one who was redesigning the board itself. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was only the beginning. The integration of the Metro Holdings employees was the first true test of the Elm Street prototype's principles. It was one thing to preach community and second chances from a podium. It was another to enact it in the messy reality of human resentment and fear. David, the former mid-level manager, became the reluctant representative of the group. He was a man in his late 40s, his suit a little too sharp for a construction site, his demeanor still clinging to the corporate hierarchy he'd been cast out from. The existing community members, the Millers and Garcias, viewed them with a mixture of curiosity and deep-seated suspicion. These were the people, or at least worked for the people, who had represented the system that had failed them. The first conflict arose over the community garden plots. Mrs. Garcia had meticulously planned the layout. David, seeing an inefficiency in the watering system, had redirected a hose line without consulting anyone, drowning her tomato seedlings. It was a simple optimization, David explained to Maya later, genuinely baffled by the old woman's tears. The water pressure was. It was her garden, David, Maya said, her voice calm but firm. She stood with him and a distraught Mrs. Garcia in the freshly turned earth. This isn't a corporate flow chart. You don't optimize someone's home. It was a microcosm of the larger challenge. The Metro employees knew systems, logistics, and budgets. The community knew trust, shared space, and resilience. They were speaking different languages. Maya didn't force a resolution. Instead, she set up a skills share evening in the half-constructed community. Center, the Garcia's grandson, a whiz with solar-powered gadgets, showed David how he was rigging a low-cost irrigation timer. David, in turn, showed the boy how to create a simple spreadsheet to track the parts and costs, his corporate expertise finding a new human purpose. Mrs. Garcia, seeing David patiently teaching her grandson, slowly let her guard down. She later confessed to Maya, over a cup of tea, that her own son had passed away, and seeing that patience from a man David's age had touched a place in her heart she thought had closed. Julian observed this social alchemy from a distance. His analysis delivered via text after Maya sent him a photo of David and the Garcia boy working together. JT, you're not building houses. You're performing societal triage. The ROI is incalculable, but the risk of catastrophic failure is immense. Maya, it's not triage, it's healing, and healing isn't a line on a balance sheet. He didn't reply, but a week later, a state-of-the-art prefabricated medical clinic unit was delivered to the site, a tangible, multi-million-dollar endorsement of her methods. The real threat when it came was not from a politician but from the market. The success of the prototype was driving up property values in the surrounding blocks. A developer named Astra Holdings, seeing the potential for high-end lofts and artisanal coffee shops, began aggressively buying up the surrounding properties. Their model was the antithesis of the prototype: displace, gentrify, profit. They saw Maya's community not as a partner but as a temporary obstacle. Eviction notices began appearing on the doors of long-term residents just outside the prototype's borders. The fear that had once lived inside Maya now lapped at the edges of her creation. She went to Julian, this time in his penthouse. The view of the city seemed darker, the lights below more menacing. Astra is a different beast than Vance, Julian said, staring out at the skyline. They're not political, they're purely financial. They're amoral. You can't reason with a virus. You can only contain it or become immune. Then we make the community immune, Maya said, a new, radical idea forming. We can't just own our block, we need to own the buffer. Acquire the surrounding properties, Julian raised an eyebrow. The capital required would be staggering, even for me. Not a choir, Maya said, her eyes alight with the audacity of it. We form a cooperative, a community land trust. We get the residents in those threatened buildings to pool what little resources they have. The foundation provides the legal and financial backing. We help them buy their own buildings collectively. We make the entire neighborhood a co-op, owned by the people who live here. We make it unsellable to predators like Astra. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. Julian turned from the window. His gaze on her was one of sheer, unadulterated astonishment. He had taught her to play the game of power and capital, and she was now proposing to use those very tools to dismantle the board itself. That's not just disruptive, Maya. That's revolutionary. It's the only way, she said, her voice steady. It's the final piece of the prototype, true, permanent security. The campaign to form the Elm Street Cooperative was the hardest fight yet. It required convincing scared, cash-strapped tenants to trust a system that had always failed them. It required nights spent in crowded living rooms, explaining legal documents, calming fears, and building a consensus one weary soul at a time. David and his team, with their corporate skills, became invaluable, creating financial models and projections that gave the plan a sheen of professional credibility that won over the doubters. Leo, now 8, even helped, designing colorful flyers with his tablet that explained the co-op in simple, child-friendly terms. The day the final signatures were secured and the cooperative was officially formed, a quiet celebration erupted on the prototype's central green. It wasn't the loud victory over Vance. It was a deeper, more profound triumph. They had built a fortress not of brick and mortar, but of shared ownership and collective will. That evening, Maya found Julian standing at the edge of the green, watching families mingle, former Metro Holdings managers, single mothers, elderly couples, all now neighbors, all now co-owners. "You've created a sovereign state," he said, his voice laced with something she couldn't quite identify, awe perhaps, or the faintest trace of fear. "I've created a home that can defend itself," she corrected him softly. He looked at her, and in the twilight, the billionaire and the former waitress were simply two people standing at the edge of something they had built together. Yet only one of them truly understood. "The game has changed, Julian," Maya said, not looking at him but at the community, her community, glowing under the string lights. "It's not about winning anymore. It's about what world you leave behind after you've played." He had no answer for that. For the first time, Julian Thorne, the master of the game, was silent, because the woman he had lifted from the gutter had not just learned to play. She had changed the very nature of the game itself, and he was now a player in a world of her making. And he knew, with a chilling and exhilarating certainty, that her next move would redefine them all. The silence that settled between them on the community green was more profound than any they had shared. Julian Thorne, a man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets with a phone call, found himself without a script. Maya's question, "What world you leave behind?" hung in the air, a challenge that couldn't be met with a leveraged buyout or a hostile takeover. He left that night without his usual parting directive, a simple nod his only concession. The chess master had conceded that the game was no longer being played on a checkered board, but on living, breathing ground. For Maya, the work became granular, deeply human. The community land trust was a legal fortress, but its strength depended on the mortar between its bricks, the trust of its residents. She spent her days in the newly opened clinic, listening to an elderly man's worries about his medication costs. She mediated a dispute between David's team, who wanted to implement a sleek digital keycard system for the buildings, and Mr. Garcia, who argued passionately for physical keys his hands could still manage. The solution, born from a late-night conversation between David and Leo, was a hybrid system, keycards for those who wanted them and sturdy, traditional locks for others. It was messy, inefficient, and beautiful. Julian, meanwhile, began to withdraw from the daily operations of the prototype. His emails grew less frequent, his visits non-existent. At first, Maya assumed he was bored, his interest waning now that the initial, aggressive battles were won. But then, a new kind of delivery began to arrive, not contracts or luxury items, but books. Dog-eared copies of Jane Jacobs, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, essays on mutual aid societies, historical texts on the commons. He was studying. Weeks turned into a month. The prototype was thriving. The cooperative grocery store was open, its shelves stocked by a local farming collective the foundation had helped fund. The vocational center had its first graduating Class 10 residents, including 2 from the former Metro Holdings group, now certified in solar panel installation. It was then that Julian returned. He didn't call ahead. He simply appeared one afternoon walking across the central green. He looked different. The razor-sharp suit was replaced by dark, well-worn jeans and a simple sweater. He carried no briefcase. "Walk with me," he said when he found Maya helping arrange chairs in the community center. They walked in silence for a while, past the garden where Mrs. Garcia and David were now companionably weeding, past the clinic with its short line of patients. "It's louder than I expected," Julian finally said, his voice thoughtful, "and slower." "Life usually is," Maya replied. He stopped, turning to face her. The calculated intensity in his eyes had been replaced by a raw, unvarnished curiosity. "I've spent my entire life acquiring things, companies, assets, influence. I believed that was power, that control was the ultimate objective." He gestured around them. This has a different kind of power. It's messy, it's inefficient, it's infuriatingly dependent on things I can't quantify, but it's durable." Maya waited, sensing he was on the edge of something monumental. "I've been restructuring the foundation," he said, his gaze steady on hers. "The Johnson-Thorne Foundation will be dissolved." Maya's heart stuttered. This was it, the withdrawal of support, the end of the experiment. But Julian continued, his voice gaining a new, quiet strength. "Its assets, all of them, will be transferred to a new entity, a permanent, resident-controlled trust. The Thorne name will be removed. I've drawn up the papers. It will be called the Elm Street Permanent Fund. It will be governed by a board elected from this community. You will be its first chair if you want it. But after that, it's yours, truly yours." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He wasn't withdrawing. He was surrendering. He was giving it all away. "Why?" Maya breathed the word barely a whisper. A look of profound, unsettling vulnerability crossed his face, so fleeting she almost missed it. "Because you were right. It's not about the game, it's about the world you leave behind." He looked out at the community, his expression one of a man seeing a new and foreign skyline. "I built towers of glass and steel that will be sold and resold, their names forgot. This," he nodded toward the garden, the clinic, the children playing, "this might actually last, and I want to have built something that lasts." He was ceding control, not as a tactic but as a conclusion. The ultimate power move was to relinquish power. Tears she didn't know she had been holding back finally welled in Maya's eyes. They were not tears of gratitude, but of a hard one, shared understanding. "What will you do?" she asked. He gave a small, genuine smile, the first that ever reached his eyes without a trace of calculation. "I'm not sure. Perhaps I'll finally learn to play the piano." He turned and walked away, across the green and out of the gates of the community he had helped create but no longer owned. He didn't look back. Maya stood there for a long time, the weight of his gift settling on her shoulders. It was no longer a burden, but a mantle. She was no longer a player in someone else's game. She was the steward of a world she had helped build. Later that evening, she sat on her porch with Leo, watching the lights come on in the houses of the Elm Street Cooperative. The fortress was complete, its foundations dug deep not into the earth, but into the hearts of the people within it. "Is Mr. Thorne gone?" Leo asked, looking up from his tablet. In a way, Maya said, putting her arm around him. But he's also a part of this place now, forever. Leo thought about this, then nodded, satisfied. He went back to his game, the heir to a small, resilient kingdom. Maya looked out at the quiet, thriving streets. The game was over. The work, the beautiful, endless work, had just begun.